Okay.
Got some questions, do we?
Yeah, shall we go to the question session? Q&A?
Ajahn, question number 1. How do you practice the 4 brahmaviharas? As Ajahn mentioned, it is a part of your practice. Much gratitude for sharing Dhamma via the internet. Sadhu.
Since I was a fairly young monk, one Pansa, entering my second rainy season retreat at Ajahn Achalo's, I was very inspired to practice very hard, and I put forth a lot of good effort and I got some good results, but I found that the mind became a bit brittle and was prone to kind of going up and down. And so Ajahn Achalo, my main teacher in Thailand, who does have a lot of metta, suggested to me that I begin every single sitting meditation with 10 minutes of loving kindness meditation, and also combining that with reflections on not self. And I did. I told the story last week actually of the occasion where I was upset and sweeping leaves, and I was irritated because the way they swept leaves, they didn't make much sense. And then I was very hot with my angry judgment and frustration. Westerners tend to be very attached to things making sense, and Thai people tend to be willing to do things more as a faith practice without judging it so much. And then what happened was Ajahn Achalo, I noticed that all of a sudden I felt happy and well and cool. And then I saw Ajahn Achalo walking past, and I asked him the next day if he'd helped me. And he said, and I remember I showed you, he did this with his body language. He says, yes, I knocked your mind state out of your mind with metta. And then I said, could you please do that every day? And he said, no. He said that he wanted to show me that it was perfectly possible to be sweeping leaves and not be hot and angry and frustrated. And he was showing me what it was like to have a mind that really had a lot of metta. So obviously that was very inspiring, and it was an effective teaching because I did commit to also going and talking with Ajahn. You could feel this kind of cooling energy, cooling you down a bit, and at the same time, your well-being being elevated. So that's the kind of effect that metta practice can have, but we have to cultivate it. So to get good results from metta, we have to have a discipline. And for our disciplines to be effective, we have to be consistent. So Ajah's suggestion of the first 10 minutes of every sit was effective. When I look back now, 22 years later, since he gave that advice, 23 years later, I definitely have a lot more metta than I used to have. And so it starts with thoughts and intention. As I was saying in the guided meditation, we start with a quality of acceptance so that we can drop any judgment. Oftentimes for modern people, there's a latent fault-finding tendency and a bit of a withholding of loving kindness towards oneself. So the loving acceptance first, I lovingly allow, you can say some phrases, I lovingly allow this experience just as it is, I lovingly accept this experience just as it is, as a way of dropping judging it. And then we add the wish, may I be well, may I be happy. And those can seem like kind of banal words. You have to invest those words with meaning. So what would it mean to be well? What would it mean to you to be happy. So to be well and to be happy, I think, means that we would abandon our unskillful habits and we would increase our skillful habits, because that's what would make us well and happy. So we invest those words with meaning, and then we really mean it. I do think recognizing our potential to become liberated, enlightened, completely free of greed, hatred, and delusion is very important as well. That is part of Buddhanusati. When you recollect the quality of the Buddha and Sanghanusati, then you realize that you have the very same potential to purify your mind and develop wholesome qualities, bring them to fruition. And so when you wish yourself well, when we wish ourselves well, we are wishing that we realize, that we cultivate and realize our potential. So of course that means realizing not self. And it's important that we understand conventional and ultimate reality. Conventional reality for most people is that we think we're a self, and we're living with other people who think they're selves. And in that experience, there's a lot of sometimes joy, happiness, friendship, but also conflict, friction, misunderstanding, challenges. And so the conventional being needs to be supported along the process of having insight and realizing not self. So they're not practices that, because some people think it's vain to sit there and think, may I be well, may I be happy, when what we're trying to do is realize not self. We understand that the self-view is a big part of the problem. But Lord Buddha explains in the Sutta on the 11 benefits of loving kindness practice that people who cultivate loving kindness, their minds become peaceful easily. So it's an important part of functioning well and having a healthy, happy mind is what allows the mind to come inwards and collect. Because we need to understand that ill will is one of the 5 hindrances: irritation, anger. So that's an energy that obstructs peacefulness. Loving kindness is the antidote or the remedy. So Lord Buddha never taught metta just on its own. Metta also came in a package along with death contemplation and body contemplation, which lead into insight into not self. But it's an important part of the practice. So that's Ajahn suggesting, suppose I'm going to sit for an hour. Well, then the first 10 minutes. Once you get skilled at establishing a feeling of warmth and kindness, goodwill in the heart, that is important to be able to feel it, then it's very important that you include other beings, because we don't want to increase what they call self-cherishing. So having loving kindness for oneself is where we start. And then it's important to include, through methodical training, a few beings who we find it easy to have loving kindness towards, and then larger numbers of what is referred to as neutral beings. So that might be the cleaning lady, the bus driver, the train ticket collector, people who you see that you don't think much of, but much about, but that you see around. Include them, really wish them well as well. And then eventually you include beings who you find it difficult to have loving kindness for. And that's where it becomes a real discipline, like stretching that capacity to be able to, it doesn't mean you have to like people. So you can not like a person, you can wish them well. And so it has many benefits in your daily life when you come up in situations where there's conflict, as you can, once you have the capacity to hold loving kindness in your own body and mind and radiate it outwards, you can be with someone who you find difficult and spread loving kindness to them on your feet. That kind of result requires practice. But these kind of practices do gain momentum over time. Simply by being consistent, they really do develop a lot of power. So that someone like Ajahn Achalo's loving kindness is so powerful that it can knock the mind state, a negative mind state, out of another being's mind. And then when people used to go and see the Dalai Lama teaching large crowds, 3,000, 5,000, 7,000, sometimes 30,000. And a lot of those people felt personally blessed. He just had this capacity, very evolved being, had this capacity to increase his loving kindness so that everybody who's there feels blessed. So it is a quality that can be cultivated immeasurably, but it's part of the foundation which allows our minds to collect, become peaceful, so that then we can do other reflective meditations, which help to ripen insight and ripen liberation. With regards to compassion, the second brahmavihara, this is a bit harder than metta, and it's actually not talked about that much in Theravada Buddhism, and I think it's because it has implications. Loving kindness is goodwill, wishing beings well. Of course, we practice loving kindness, there is a feeling of wanting to be kind to more people. Compassion is the wish for people to be free of suffering. It requires more empathy. So with the attitude of compassion, you have to become aware of another being's suffering. So you have to be resonating, empathizing, intuiting the fact that this other being is suffering, hurting, in pain. And then you wish them to be completely free of suffering. It requires a different kind of a depth. Some people say metta is warm and compassion is cool. And the implication of developing a lot of compassion is that you start to feel that you have to do things to help beings be free of their suffering. So compassion is more emphasized in Mahayana and Vajrayana, where everybody makes a vow to be a Buddha. And that path is much, much, much longer than the path towards arahantship. It's a personal choice how much as a practitioner you want to develop these brahmaviharas. Certain type of character feels a great deal of joy in the courage of wishing all beings to be free from suffering. There's something, the mind is liberated from its selfish, self-involved, scared, habitual mind states to something quite heroic. May all beings be free from suffering. It's very expansive. So I do have on my website several guided meditations on metta, where some are using a feeling, just a feeling of goodwill, loving kindness. Another one is using visualization as well, golden light. I also last year completed a series of compassion meditations on my website as well, going from basic to advanced, which means including all of the difficult beings. And there are 2 talks on in the compassion collection as well. Very helpful in the process of developing compassion for the difficult beings. It's very helpful to consider the fact that when their minds are affected by the people who we experience as difficult are ones who have negative qualities and do harmful things to others. When we consider the fact that their mind is oppressed by negative mind states, and then we ask ourselves, how does that feel? How would that feel? And then we consider the karma that they will inevitably have to endure, having acted on negative qualities and having harmed beings, then it's very possible to develop compassion even for the most horrible, mean beings. So sometimes, for example, suppose somebody like Stalin, Mao Zedong, somebody who ordered many people to be tortured and murdered. When you think of that person, it's difficult to have compassion for them. But you imagine that being reborn as a little baby and having parents who are abusive to that baby from the moment it's born, slapping its face or hitting it, neglecting it, and that baby having bones broken or treated very harshly. And then you imagine that happening for 1,000 lives, things like that. You do a little bit of reflective meditation, then you understand that beings who cause harm are going to endure incredible suffering. We don't do that reflection to delight in it. We don't delight in retribution. Sometimes people misunderstand the Buddha's teachings. I think, I don't have to wish him harm. I don't have to wish him or her pain because karma will sort them out. Karma will come back and get them anyway. And there's some kind of rejoicing in that. That's not either metta or compassion. So we don't rejoice in any being suffering. And, but I find it myself much easier to have compassion for a negative, harmful being when I imagine them in their next life experiencing terrible difficulty from early childhood, which is often the consequence. If you see a baby and you see the mother slapping his face, you're going to feel, oh my God, don't hurt that baby. You're not thinking, yeah, serves you right. That's what you get for hurting all those people last life. So put a little bit of thought into it, and we understand that because beings are ignorant, they're deluded. The things they do because they think that it will fulfill their happiness. And when they do harmful things, they're creating terrible suffering for others and themselves. And it's worthy of compassion. But we have to do some reflection to develop that capacity. But it's very valuable, because to be able to liberate ourselves from angry judgment and self-righteousness, and to be able to have compassion for all classes of beings, means that we have a Brahma-like mind, an expansive, radiant, bright mind that wishes beings well and wishes nobody harm. So that's ridding ourselves from various types of suffering. Mudita is rejoicing in other people's happiness and goodness. Again, we just have to make it. I haven't done a series of guided meditations on mudita, and I'm thinking that I probably should. So that might be one of my next projects. But we have to train in it and set a period of time. So if you're a person who's prone to competitiveness or prone to envy, jealousy, then this is a kind of a mind state that will bring that into balance, where we practice being happy for the good fortune of others. And again, we have to do a little bit of reflection. We have to think about karma. Nobody gets a good opportunity if they didn't put the work into it in the past somehow. And sometimes it might seem unfair. You work harder, but someone else got the promotion. And but everything has a karmic cause. And when we reflect on past karmas ripening, then we can rejoice in whatever goodness that being did in their past lives and be happy for them. Equanimity, the fourth brahmavihara, in my experience, skillful and correct meditation simply leads to having more equanimity. Because when you come to sit meditation, there will be thoughts, there will be feelings, there will be hindrances, there might be some kilesa present in the mind. And you just keep coming back to the breath and putting things down, and the mind will attain to some equipoise. Equanimity is often misunderstood as a kind of indifference or detachment. It's more like the mind being in a perfectly stable, balanced state. So it's more like equilibrium, equipoise, stability, steadiness, not moving. So in equanimity there is quite a bit of samadhi. In equanimity there is samadhi, and in terms of cultivating equanimity as a reflective methods that help, it's the law of karma that helps us. If ever the mind has been swayed, it's reflecting on karma that can help us bring the mind into balance. When we understand that everything has a karmic cause, suppose you are angry at somebody who harmed somebody, we have to reflect on the fact that the person who was harmed so causes to be harmed. And similarly, reflecting on the consequences of the person doing the harmful deed, then we can find that balance. So it starts as intentions, thoughts, disciplined ways of reflecting, but because they are very wholesome emotions, mind states, they become samadhi. So metta can be taken to the level of jhana. So at that stage, there won't be any thoughts. There's just this intense, loving, kind energy that is just established. And that is the meditation object. And people who are adept can stay in that state for long periods. And that can be the case with compassion and mudita. As I said, there's a certain amount of equanimity in samadhi, in any of the samadhi states, but equanimity is in its most pure form in the fourth jhana. And it plays so the fourth jhana is like pure equanimity. It plays a very important role in purifying the mind, because apparently, from what I've heard from my teachers, once a person is a stream enterer, it's easier to get the jhanas and to go from the first, second, third, and attain the fourth, because there's less kilesa in the mind, less delusion. And then it's keeping the mind in that pure equanimous state starves what is left of greed and hatred. It's just not moving, staying still, staying centered, not being moved. Doesn't feed the greed, doesn't feed the hatred, so that it kind of shrivels up and falls away from the mind. So equanimity plays a very important role in purification of mind. But in my experience, the more you meditate, more equanimity develops, because you will be sitting with pain and have to find an equanimous space to be able to keep sitting. But please do explore the guided meditations on metta and compassion if you need a bit of help, and go a bit further with it. If you've established loving kindness for yourself, then try to include more neutral beings, some difficult beings, and then balance it with the investigation of the body as elements. Use the stability that you get from the metta and the well-being as a foundation to do the investigative practices that will liberate you. Interesting to note, sometimes people wonder, it's possible to be liberated through practicing brahmaviharas, something that's not so well known. And the way that it's possible is that if you're paying attention with mindfulness as the mind goes into neighborhood concentration and then absorbs into the metta jhana, when the mind comes out of the metta jhana, mindfulness with clear comprehension, if it notices the texture of the quality of the mind changing, coming from the jhanic absorbed state to the neighborhood jhanic state, it can have a liberating insight into not self by seeing the impermanence of the mind state. So it is possible. But from what I've studied from my teachers, and from what I heard of my teachers' teachers, in this day and age, it's more the body contemplation that I think that would require quite refined faculties, powerful faculty of mindfulness to notice that very subtle impermanence as the metta jhana degenerates into upajara metta, neighborhood metta. But it's good to know that you can take these practices to the point of liberation and enlightenment as a way to trust them, and as a way to understand that they can complement your contemplations of impermanence and not self. So I hope something I said was helpful.
Ajahn, the next question is about transfer merit. So the question, it is said when a person dies, he or she is immediately reborn. We don't know what he's reborn as or in. When we transfer merit, will he definitely receive it then? Thank you, Ajahn.
So I'm going to defer to what Ajahn, from my discussions with Ajahn Achalo, who I believe has the ability to see when beings move from their life into the intermediate state and onto the next life. So what's that, JC? Somebody's music. So it's, samsara is a bit complicated. There are billions of beings in an unending universe, unending universes. So we have to talk about generalization, general laws. So the way Ajahn Achalo explained it is that if a person has extremely good karma, if a being has extremely good karma, their rebirth will probably be very swift. Like literally, possibly a moment that the body passes away and they move very swiftly to a heaven realm. Often it might be the case that literally a carriage, a jeweled carriage has arrived and is waiting to carry that being, and because their mind is so wholesome, has so much merit, when the mind leaves the body, it's already leaving in a deva state, you see. In a way, we're being reborn moment by moment. Anyway, even with our human body, this is important to understand. So if the mind falls into a heavy depression, we have a heavy body, but a ghost mind state. If the mind falls into a passionate mood of lust and we indulge it, we hang on to that, it might be in like a dog in heat mind state. If we indulge angry, spiteful, vengeful thoughts, the mind could be in a demonic state, even though you have a human body. And the gifted monks who can read minds can actually see these things. So they can see, we have a subtle body. The body is 4 elements, and there's a mind, there's consciousness inhabiting this body. And that consciousness changes. In any one day, you might have human states, animal states, deva states, demonic states. In fact, you probably do. So you see some news that you don't like it, you get angry, and but then you remember that's not useful, kind of reestablish a bit more balance. See something that you really like, might get a bit lusty, then that passes. In general, the level that the mind has been on average throughout your life is at the most likely rebirth. However, the final moments are important. So this is one of the reasons we do death meditation, is to help us to be ready for it, so that we can die with clarity and with a readiness to go. So a lot of ghost state, a lot of beings that get caught in the ghost state didn't know that they were dying when they died. So they're kind of confused and they just hang around, or were so attached to the place they were and didn't want to leave. So it's important to do death meditation so that you know when you're dying, oh, I'm dying. It doesn't take you completely by surprise, and you know to let go quickly. So there is a lot of documentation, what you might call anecdotal evidence, of people seeing ghosts who are in the state of corpses, or even in the state of drowned women with running makeup, or of skeletons. So what I believe is happening on those occasions is the consciousness was so attached to that body and so unwilling to move on that it left the body when the body started to decompose, or was already significantly decomposed. And then people make a mistake. People think that the ghost is coming to them in a scary form to scare them. But no, the ghost is just coming in the form that it is in, because it was so attached to the body that it didn't leave the body until the body started to rot or decompose. And so it's important to try to have compassion for ghosts, because oftentimes they're not coming to scare people, they're coming to ask for help. And but they look scary, so people think that they're coming to scare them. So as I was saying, if you have very, very good karma, Ajahn Achalo said, likely your rebirth will be very swift. It's like if you have a lot of merit in the human realm, or a lot of money from past good karmas, you check in at the business class, you get ushered through the fast lane, and you get on the plane first. So if you have a lot of very heavy bad karma, same. The mind will tend to fall to a low realm fast. So Lord Buddha does say that with regards to consciousness, merit and karma, if you throw stones into a river, they will sink. And if you throw butter into a river, it will float. So obviously stones being heavy, negative deeds, butter being meritorious, skillful deeds. Most people, this is where it gets interesting, most people have a certain amount of good karma and a certain amount of bad karma. And so this is where rebirth is often not instantaneous. So Ajahn Achalo says that most beings will take 3 to 4 days. Most humans will take 3 to 4 days to have their rebirth. That makes much more sense to me. A lot of people who study Abhidhamma tend to think that the next rebirth is in the next moment, you're just instantly reborn. The Buddha does explain, however, that to be born as a human being, consciousness has to find a suitable, you have to find 2 people who are having sex, and the consciousness has to go into that womb. And there has to be a moment where the consciousness is attracted either to the man or to the woman, so that it sticks inside the womb. So I don't think it's possible that in one moment consciousness has instantly found a womb and it's going there. So it makes more sense to me that something is wandering around for a while. What is that? So Ajahn Achalo has also explained to me that in a way, consciousness leaves the human form, and suppose you have the kind of merit which is going to lead to another human birth. in a way you have a birth in between the births, so you're born into an intermediate state. It's like when the consciousness leaves its body. And so there are a lot of people who have dreams of their relatives in the day or second day or third day after they die. Oftentimes they look similar to how they looked alive. If they have a good karma and they're likely to go to a good destination, they might look younger, they might have nice clothes. If they were in a bit of a negative state and they didn't have much merit, they might look a bit poorer than they were as a human, and they might not look in a very good state. In a lot of Buddhist cultures, there is a tradition of chanting for 3 days. And I think this is just interesting, an interesting thing to notice, that in Thailand, they don't burn the body straight away. And they don't rush it off to a morgue. In traditional Thailand, rural Thailand, they would keep the body at home for 3 days. And they would invite the monks to come and chant for 3 days, and they would make offerings. So I think that's with the understanding that the merits that are dedicated, if a being is hanging around in an intermediate state, it can receive merits and it can rejoice, and that can help the rebirth. So I tend to believe this because I've just heard so many stories, and people tend to like me telling stories, so I'm just going to tell 2 stories, okay? Is that okay with you? So there's a lady in the village who puts food in our bowls every day, and her husband, they used to take turns, so her husband used to put food in our bowls. And then one day his body was stretched out on a table, about to be waiting for the coffin to arrive, and he had a sheet over him and he'd passed away. So the next day I asked the lady who put this food in the bowl, "How are you doing? Your husband's died." And she said, "Well, he's still hanging around. I saw him walking around the house, and so I just set his place for dinner, and he sat down. Obviously he couldn't eat the food, but he sat at the dinner table. Well, then I asked her the next day, how are you feeling now?" So she wasn't actually experiencing any grief because she had enough sensitivity in her mind to see him still wandering around the house. And so she's like, there's this idea of death. He died. It's like, no, the body died and consciousness continues. And so the next I ask her, is he still hanging around? I did my duty of spreading metta because he put food in my bowl for years. She said, no, I haven't seen him anymore. And she had a dream of him. And in the dream, he appeared younger and in nice clothes. That's the second day. So I would assume that the consciousness had rejoiced in the merit, received the merit. And the third day, she didn't have any more dreams and she didn't see him. And I asked her, how are you feeling? She said, well, I feel like he went to a good place. So that was, I think, one of your classic 2 or 3 or 4 days rebirths. Then there was a Sri Lankan lady in Melbourne, came to make merit at Ajahn Achalo's monastery at the 1-year anniversary of her father's death. And she was in a good mood. And Ajahn Achalo noticed this. It's not very often that a widow who loved her husband comes on the anniversary of the death and they're in a cheerful state. So he asked her, can I just ask you about his death? You don't seem sad. She said, no, I'm not sad. I'm very confident that he went to a better place. So I'm happy for him. Well, what makes you think that? She said, well, we were sitting at the breakfast table and he was having a cup of tea and he took a sip of his tea. And then he said, I can see Devas. And then he put down his cup and then he was dead. So it's a nice story because it does illustrate that death can be easy. It doesn't have to be painful and difficult, although it often is. But in terms of that first category I was talking about, people for whom rebirth is instantaneous and fast, people with a lot of good karma. So one of the things that can cause us to have a painful dying process is how many animals we've kept in cages and killed, how many chickens' heads we've chopped off, and how many fish we've caught, how many animals we've been unkind to, then how much pain we cause them as they were dying. That is often a factor in why we have painful deaths. Another story. I said 2 stories, but it's the 3. 3 is a nice number. So, there was a lady who used to cook food for Anandagiri's gatherings. Lovely vegetarian food. I never met her. Her sister used to bring the food. Some of that food was offered to Lumpur Biak and Ajahn. So, wonderful monks, very good karma. I went to India, meditating 10 hours a day for a couple of months. Had to come back sooner than I thought because of the corona situation. But my mind was probably in a pretty bright state, having put a lot of effort into practice for a period of months. And I went to visit my disciples who have a coffee shop in Pitsanalok city. And they'd sent me a message when I was in India that this person had cancer. So what happened was this lady suddenly had a pain, and it was the first time she'd noticed anything unusual, and she already had 4th stage cancer. And as it happened, it was 21 days since after she was diagnosed that she died, which is, as far as deaths from cancer, it's very fast. But anyway, I was back in Pitsanalok and I asked how is she doing, and it turned out that she was no longer speaking and the hospital wasn't far away. And I said, I'd be happy to go and do some chanting for her, because she had supported I had never met her, but I know that she supported Anandagiri's gatherings. So I wanted to chant. So I went to the hospice, a very dismal, depressing sight. Beds were 2 meters apart. There's about 40 people in there, all of them a couple of days or weeks away from dying. And so I had to squeeze in between the beds of 2 different dying people. And I'm like, do you mind if I do some chanting to these kind of, so I shouldn't laugh. But they did kind of nod, yeah, it's okay. Well, most of them are Buddhists, probably all of them were Buddhists. And I actually took out some blessed amulets from my monk's bag, and the recent mala that the Dalai Lama had blessed. And this particular woman had faith in Kuan Yin, being ethnically Chinese. And so I placed some amulets on her chest area, and I chanted some Pali and the chant we just chanted before, the long mantra to Kuan Yin. And then I just thought in my mind, speaking to the devas. I don't know if the devas could hear me, but I just had that intention of kind of saying, this lady supported the Sangha. This lady has faith in the Buddha, the Bodhisattvas, the Arahants. May her merit protect her. May the devas come and do their duty, take her to an auspicious rebirth. And I did some chanting. So I think it was 4 days later that she died. So they've burned the body, and they're at the funeral, and everybody's kind of feeling sad. Oh, so fast. She only had 3 weeks. Now she's dead. This idea of dead. Now she's dead. She's dead. So it's really important to consider this. What does it mean to be dead? The body dies in a moment and consciousness continues. So anyway, her consciousness enters her big sister's body and starts talking. And she calls over, and the voice is not the sister's voice. The voice is the vegetarian cook's voice. And she calls over the lady from the coffee shop. Dao, come here, Dao. Dao comes over and she says, I just want to thank you for bringing that monk and for him chanting for me. Because when he did that, the path of light just opened up before me. And then she said, I'm worried about this person, and don't forget to do this and don't forget to do that. But now I have to go. Bye. So why did she have to go? I would assume that the devas have come to pick her up and she's got to go with the devas. So the lady's Yom Dao is telling me this story and she's like, Ajahn, is this possible? Can this happen? Is this possible? I'm like, you're the one that's telling me what you saw with your own eyes and heard with your own ears. Why are you asking me if it's possible? So anyway, that's the third story of a person who had good karma. I mean, you can see the good, or another way that the good karma ripens is that I have the feeling that I want to go and chant for her, even I never met her. So why do I have that feeling? That's her merit. So I don't believe that rebirth is the next second. I don't believe that. Even if it's fast, there is a process of traveling up to the heaven realm, even it might be quite fast, or falling to the hell realm. But for people who are likely to have a human birth, the state is the consciousness is called a sambhavesi, which means awaiting rebirth. So if a person doesn't move on in those 3 or 4 days, that's when you get these kind of beings get stuck. So it is important, if you find yourself that the body's dead and consciousness has a choice to move on, it is important to go quickly. Can beings receive merit? So some can and some can't. The ones who are likely to be reborn as human beings definitely can, particularly from relatives. And the ones who are likely to be born as devas can. The ones who fall to apparently, even if you're reborn as a human, an animal, a ghost, not ghost, a human, an animal, or a hell being, apparently the merit doesn't get through. But merit is merit. Whatever merit you made is your merit, conventionally speaking, and you're dedicating it, so the merit isn't wasted. When you dedicate merit, by the way, you don't lose your merit, you multiply your merit. It's an important thing to understand. The skillful thing that you did was the skillful thing that you did. That is your good karma. Nothing can change that. But when you are sharing the brightness of that mind state with another being, that's metta, dedicating merit, then that actually multiplies your merit. So no merit is wasted if a being can't receive it. But oftentimes the ghosts, if they're a close relative and if they have the capacity to rejoice, this is another important factor. And this is another reason why cultivating mudita is helpful. And if we have an envious or jealous tendency to really try not to indulge that if we are capable of rejoicing with other people's good fortune, that is what is going to help us have the capacity to rejoice if we get in an intermediate state and we're having difficulty moving on. If somebody makes a merit and we have that tendency to rejoice, when you rejoice, instantly the mind is no longer in a ghost state. So it can it can often move on quite fast. If it rejoices in the merit, the rejoicing in the merit is what makes it receptive to the merit, and then moving on. So many people know that the main reason I built the Chedi, liaised to build a Chedi in Anandagiri, was to help lots of ghosts, because I had seen in dreams a lot of ghosts around, because this is an area of communist insurgency and recently a war zone 40 years ago. So apparently, according to Lumpur Biek, whose abilities I trust, tens of thousands did take their rebirth. And many went from a ghost state to a Dawa Timsa heaven state. How is that possible? And that in a moment. How is it possible? It's because when they rejoiced in the merit, their mind is already not in a ghost state. And then when a monk with powerful meditative abilities like Lumpur Biek kind of make sure that the merit gets through to them, spreading metta, another way of making them feel gladdened, and then the merit that people are dedicating repeatedly, then the consciousness can go from a ghost state to a deva state quite fast. So anumodana to everybody who helped to move on all of those ghosts. I think I answered the question.
Ajahn, the question 3 about meditation.
Yes.
I am an amputee, right leg. I meditate on divine mind. As I meditate, my body starts to sway and rotate in a peaceful, relaxed manner. Is it piti? Please advise. Thank you.
Yeah, I would say so. I would say it is. I'm not sure if I recommend it as a basis of a meditation practice. The meditation practice that I have most faith in is breath meditation. And what's very interesting with breath meditation is that it starts with feeling like your body's breathing. It feels like a physical feeling. But of course, the body is 4 elements, so those feelings are occurring in consciousness. But let's just say it starts as coarse feelings. As the breath gets more refined, then the feelings of the breath become very subtle and very pleasant. So in a way, that's the divine body. But starting with something that appears coarse, when you're consistent and steady with it, it becomes more subtle, more radiant, more blissful. And the wonderful thing about breath meditation is that it does change moment by moment. So in that, setting the intention to be aware of the changes moment by moment, that's what makes mindfulness good, because you are noticing the changes. But when you try to take an object like the subtle body as the meditation, there isn't that breathing in, breathing out. There isn't that thing that will help the sati to be clear. So I think it's like that. The experience I have with breath meditation after about 20 minutes is that the spaces get longer, and the experience of the breath, rather than becoming like an in and an out thing, becomes more of a kind of a spherical expanding, contracting, and the peace starts here. And as I relax into the peace, it's almost like the peace is all around the whole body. So in a way, the subtle body, the mindfulness is pervading the physical and the subtle body, and then the awareness can rest in that space. But you have a center, and you have something to keep your mindfulness sharp, moment by moment by moment. So for myself, I trust that. And Lord Buddha did say that breath meditation is the crown jewel of all of the meditations. You can cultivate insight and jhana, all sorts of wonderful things with breath meditation. So yes, it probably is, but also if we get what they call agan piti in Thai, like if you get the symptoms of rapture, we're not aiming for that. It's one more thing to be mindful of. So it's a good sign, but we're aiming to go deeper. So you want to go from rapture into tranquility. Tranquility is a deeper, more stable, cooler quality. So rapture arises because you've been consistently with the mind's developing some concentration, or some stability, some stillness. But the rapture is like, my teachers explain, Ajahn Achalo explains rapture as being like the waves on the surface of the ocean. And you want to go deeper, you want to dive into the ocean. So you don't get distracted or fascinated by the waves. You keep, the reason it arose was because you were consistently with the object. So you maintain your being consistently with the object, don't get distracted. And it goes deeper into passaddhi, which is tranquility, serenity. And then it will go deeper still into equanimity, which is very blissful, serene, sometimes called serenity, deep serenity. So, yes.
Thank you, Ajahn. Ajahn, question number 4 about family. How to tackle or handle toxic people, relations, especially parents, where one tries to remain respectful and equanimous, and other party pushes us towards the wall, playing victim or picking on us. Thank you.
Advanced practice. So this is the way often the way our unskillful karmas that we made in the past ripen in our lives is in close relationships which are painful and difficult. So it's very common. It's very common that most people will have a difficult brother or sister. Many people will have a difficult parent. So how do you practice with it? And it's hard when you're under the same roof. And when it comes to parents, like, we can be so easily triggered because there is so much shared experience. So it's like all the old files are there in terms of sanya, perceptions. And so one little word, one way of slamming things down on the table, or one slammed door, or whatever it is, the thing that reminds you of all the hundreds of other times that happened, can trigger a habitual, unskillful response. So I think if it's possible not to live with them, that's probably the best choice, if it's possible. Now, that doesn't mean that you don't keep an eye on them and try to take care of them. It just means you also have your own space. If it's not possible to live away from them, then I would recommend getting up before they do and having some quiet time in the morning where you don't have to deal with it yet. So it's giving yourself time for you, establish mindfulness, establish loving kindness for yourself, so that when you see them, and if they pick on you or they're trying to trigger you, then you can, may I be well, may I be happy, may I be well, may I be happy. You can have loving kindness for yourself even while someone else radiates ill will at you. You radiate loving kindness towards yourself. Another thing that I would recommend is going for a walk. So get out of the house. Hopefully you have a park nearby, and get out in nature and look at trees, look at sky, breathe out, drop the perceptions of them, allow yourself to feel the seat under you, the nature around you, feel the breeze on your face, whatever. Mindful of the 4 elements, mindful of feelings in the body, and again, radiate loving kindness towards yourself, re-establish the goodwill. And so it requires a kind of a determined discipline to not take their fixed negative perception about you. Don't take it on. And to do that, it's like, okay, I'm leaving that with you. But sometimes it can't be vocalized. Like trying to make them take responsibility for their negativity might make them more aggressive. Or, no, it's all you. It's all your fault. You're the problem. So sometimes you can't talk with the difficult types. But you cannot believe it while they're saying it. And you can think, this person is offering me a gift and I'm not accepting it. This person can keep their gift. But having the quiet time by yourself in the morning, physically getting out of the space, it's kind of, you need to do a little bit of healing several times a day. And the good news is the metta practice does produce enormous amounts of merit. And eventually, karmas are ground down and resolved. So occasionally, a parent who has been grumpy, cantankerous, mean in their old age can become a sweet old lady or a lovely old man when the fieriness or the grumpiness, sometimes aging is very humbling. Not always. Some people seem to get worse and worse. But many people become humbled by old age and become sweeter. When I see the way my mother is towards her grandchildren compared to how she was to her children, she definitely became more benevolent and lovely in her old age. Part of that would be the stress of having 6 kids that you have to cook for and wash the clothes and clean the house. And once they've all left home, it's much less stress, isn't it? And it's with less stress, it's more easy to enjoy your grandkids. But yeah, it can be difficult. And I'm fortunate because as a monk, I mean, I think I've mentioned in previous talks that I used to be quite argumentative with my parents as a teenager. And both of them had quite strong characters. So I could be triggered by my parents. But the wonderful thing about being a monk is you can always say, well, I'm going to my room to meditate now. And they're not going to make a problem out of it. It's like, well, that's part of my job. And so I could always, if I didn't want to watch the war movie with my dad, then I go to my bedroom and chant and meditate. And they were okay with that. But yeah, being in nature, feeling the ground, taking your shoes off, feeling the ground under your feet, seeing the sky, allowing that contractedness to expand. And just think in terms of elements, not I, not mine. And then another person's aiming ill will at you. You don't have to contend, don't be contentious, but at the very same time when they're aiming ill will at you, you are determined to radiate goodwill towards yourself. So one of the benefits in the 11 benefits of metta sutta, one of the benefits of metta is that sharp objects cannot penetrate. So you can take that as meaning a physical thing, but you could also take it as meaning verbal daggers. So if you really have loving kindness established for yourself, if someone else says something really nasty to you, but you have this established metta, it won't come in. And if it comes in a little bit, and if you're sensitized and sensitive in your heart area, and you're aware that that hurts, then you're aware that this is a suffering being, and you instantly respond with, may I be well, may I be happy, may I be free from suffering. So this is the value of really training in this, so that you have this response ready to go. And but that's why getting up earlier, putting some diligent, serious effort into the practice, and then getting some space. Yeah. But if you can live separately and visit, even if a person is sickly and they need care, okay, visit a couple of times a day. Make sure they have good food, make sure they get bathed or whatever. But if you can get to a different physical space, that's a good option. If you can't, get up earlier, go for a walk, get out of the house. And trust that this too will change. And that whatever effort you make at being mindful, not being contentious, cultivating loving kindness, is already producing better conditions in the future. So I offer that for your reflection.
And thank you so much for the kind advice. Ajahn, we have 3 more questions in the list.
I think we might have to wait. Yeah. Yeah.
So
Pause enough. Pause enough. Was it 4 questions?
we still have 3 more.
Next time.
Okay, I'll keep for next time. I'll keep in the list.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you so much.
You're all very good. I keep an eye on how many people flake out in my hour and a quarter or hour and a half ramble. And most of you are still there. So Anumodana for your attention spans. Shall we dedicate some merits? Through the goodness that arises from my practice, may my spiritual teachers and guides of great virtue, my mother and my father and my relatives, the sun and the moon, and all virtuous leaders of the world, may the highest gods and evil forces, celestial beings, guardian spirits of the earth, and the Lord of death, may those who are friendly, indifferent, or hostile, may all beings receive the blessings of my life. May they soon attain the threefold bliss and realize the deathless. Through the goodness that arises from my practice, and through this act of sharing, may all desires and attachments quickly cease, and all harmful states of mind, until I realize Nibbana in every kind of birth. May I have an upright mind, with mindfulness and wisdom, austerity and vigor. May the forces of delusion not take hold, nor weaken my resolve. The Buddha is my excellent refuge. Unsurpassed is the protection of the Dhamma. The solitary Buddha is my noble Lord. The Sangha is my supreme support. Through the supreme power of all these, may darkness and delusion be dispelled.
Can we all say Sadhu 3 times for Ajah's teaching and advice and answering all the questions? Sadhu.
Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.
We'd like to pay respect to Ajahn before he goes off. 3 times in your own space and wherever you are.
This is like it's like a roll call. I'm seeing who all came. Yeah.
There they are.
So
Please
have a lot of,
mute your microphone, please. Thank you.
yeah, okay. So a lot of Malaysians,
A lot of Singaporeans today
a lot
as
of
well.
Singaporeans today, yes.
Yes.
A couple of people in the UK,
There are a lot of Thais as well tonight, Ajahn.
right. Okay, very nice to see your faces.
I'm happy to share time with you, doing wholesome things together, contemplating Dhamma, learning about training our mind. I wish you firm resolve, confidence in your practice, consistency, because that is what is going to produce the merits and manifest the stability of mind and the depth of insight. So may we all continue in our practice diligently. And, take care.
Thank you, Ajahn.
Good.